When Matthew first joined the young adults Bible study at his church, he didn't expect the topic of masturbation to ever come up. They usually talked about scripture, prayer, or the struggles of everyday life. But one evening, when the group leader opened the floor for anonymous questions written on slips of paper, Matthew's heart skipped when he saw what was pulled from the bowl. Here are just a few of the questions Christian singles of all ages have asked us about masturbation, the leader read. He paused, scanning the paper, then continued. Is it a sin? Does it damage my relationship with God? Will it affect my future marriage? And if I can't stop, what does that mean about my faith? The room grew quiet, tense in the way that only taboo subjects can create. Matthew felt his stomach knot because those were his questions too. He had asked them silently for years, but never out loud. Matthew grew up in a conservative home where the subject of sex was almost never spoken of. When it did come up, it was framed in warnings. Save yourself for marriage, stay pure, guard your heart. But nothing was ever said about what happened alone in the dark, in the privacy of a locked bedroom. By the time Matthew was a teenager, he had discovered masturbation, not through guidance but by accident, by curiosity. The first time it happened, he felt both exhilarated and ashamed. He didn't have the words to describe it, only the sinking fear that he had crossed some invisible line. He prayed hard that night, begging forgiveness, vowing never to do it again. But of course, it happened again and again. For years, Matthew lived in a cycle of secrecy and guilt. In church, he raised his hands during worship, sang with the rest of the congregation, but inside he carried a private shame. He wondered if God turned his face away every time he gave in. Sermons about purity felt like they were aimed straight at him, even when no one said the word masturbation. Now sitting in the study group as the leader unfolded the questions, Matthew leaned forward, heart pounding, waiting to hear what would be said. The leader cleared his throat and spoke carefully. This is a topic many Christians struggle with, even if they never say it aloud. Different traditions and teachers give different answers, but the questions are real, and they matter. Let's be honest about that. Matthew could see the others in the room shifting uncomfortably. A young woman next to him fiddled with her notebook, eyes lowered. A middle-aged man at the back crossed his arms tightly. The silence said what no one dared admit. This wasn't a teenager's issue alone. The leader continued. Some ask, is masturbation a sin? Scripture doesn't address it directly. There are passages about lust, about sexual immorality, about self-control, but there isn't a verse that says clearly yes or no. That's why so many Christians wrestle with it. For some, it becomes tied to pornography, and that can lead to real harm. For others, it happens without lustful images, but still raises questions of conscience. Matthew felt a strange mixture of relief and unease. Relief because at last, someone admitted the Bible didn't speak directly about it. Unease because the gray area meant he was still left to wrestle with his own conscience. The leader picked up another slip of paper. Will it damage my relationship with God? That's a heartfelt question. Many feel shame and believe God has turned away from them. But let's remember, our relationship with God is based on grace, not our ability to be flawless. That doesn't mean we take sin lightly, though, but it does mean we don't need to drown in shame. At that, Matthew swallowed hard. The word shame stung because it described his secret life so perfectly. He remembered nights he had avoided prayer altogether because he didn't feel worthy. He remembered thinking, if I can't control this, maybe I don't really love God. Another slip. What if I can't stop? What does that say about my faith? The leader read it slowly, then looked around the room. It says you're human, he answered softly. Struggle doesn't mean faith is absent. In fact, the struggle itself shows you care about walking with God. But it may also mean you need accountability, healthier habits, and grace for yourself. You are not alone in this. The silence in the room shifted. It wasn't lighter exactly, but it wasn't as heavy as before. A few people nodded. One woman raised her hand and spoke quietly. I've asked those questions since I was in high school. I thought I was the only one. Her voice trembled, but there was relief in her confession. Others began to speak too. A young man admitted he had prayed for years to be delivered instantly, but it never happened. An older single woman said she wrestled with loneliness, that sometimes made masturbation feel like a temporary comfort, even though it left her conflicted afterward. For the first time, Matthew realized this wasn't just his secret war. It was something that crossed ages, genders, and backgrounds. When it was his turn, he hesitated, but finally said, "I've carried guilt about this for so long. Every time I promised myself it would be the last time, and then when it wasn't, I thought maybe I was hopeless. Hearing others ask the same questions, it helps to know I'm not the only one." His voice cracked on the last words, but he didn't care. It was the truth. The leader listened carefully, then closed with a reminder. Masturbation, like many issues, is complicated. It can involve lust, it can become compulsive, but it doesn't have to define your entire walk with God. Don't measure your worth by this alone. Measure it by grace, by love, by the fact that God already knows you and hasn't let you go. Keep asking questions, keep bringing them into the light, because secrecy is where shame grows strongest. That night, Matthew walked home under the streetlights with a lighter step. His questions weren't all answered, not neatly, but he had heard honesty instead of silence. He had heard others share what he thought could never be spoken in church. And for the first time, he believed maybe God wasn't waiting to condemn him every time he failed. Maybe God was walking with him even in the struggle. Over the following weeks, Matthew began to pray differently. Instead of begging for instant deliverance, he prayed for patience, for wisdom, for courage to talk openly with trusted friends. He started journaling honestly about his urges instead of hiding them. Sometimes he failed, yes, but when he did, he remembered the leader's words. Struggle means you still care. In time, Matthew realized that asking the hard questions, is it sin? Does it ruin my faith? Am I alone in this? Wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a sign of faith seeking understanding. The very act of asking was itself a form of trust. Trust that God was big enough to handle the mess, the confusion, the imperfection. And so, while masturbation remained a struggle in Matthew's life, it was no longer only a source of silence and shame. It became part of his journey of honesty, humility, and learning to rest in grace. Word count, 1111. Would you like me to make this story more focused on Matthew's personal inner struggles, like a confessional narrative, or keep it balanced with the group setting and multiple voices as I've done here?